Hey there, Business for Unicorns podcast listeners. This is Mark, and I'm here to tell you about an awesome free resource on businessforunicorns.com. If you ever find yourself feeling frustrated with your training gym because you know that there are all sorts of things you could work on, but you're not really sure how to prioritize, you don't know what's the most important thing to work on or what order you should be tackling your priorities, well, now is the time to go to businessforunicorns.com, click the button, and fill out our free self-assessment. With the Ultimate Training Gym Owner Report Card, you will gain immediate clarity on just where to be focusing your attention to create more positive impact on your community, to drive more revenue and take home income, and to do it all with less stress and more peace of mind. So go to businessofunicorns.com, click the button, fill out that free self-assessment, and start building a business and life you love today.
Fitness business nerds, what's up? Welcome to another episode of the Business for Unicorns podcast. I'm here today with a third-time podcaster, our dear friend, Dr. Lisa Lewis. What's up, Lisa? How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me back.
Oh my gosh, a third time. You're in rarefied air. I don't know if there's many people I've had back on this podcast 3 times. And honestly, I wouldn't be mad if it was 30 because, I mean, there's so many things I continue to want to learn from you. And I feel like our time is always too short. I'm sure today will be no exception. But just, just generally speaking, how have you been? Our listeners want to know, how have you been in this kind of, in this kind of somewhat, I'll put it in quotes, post-COVID era. How are you? How's life?
I've been busy. I think probably anybody in mental health will say they've been very, very busy, but in a good way. I think one thing the pandemic has done is really bring down how much stigma there is around saying you have a mental health concern and seeking help for your mental health concern.
Yeah.
So me and every colleague that I know has basically no room in their schedule. And there's all kinds of cool opportunities coming up in different areas because I think of the increased demand for mental health services.
Yeah. It's so wild how, the world's just kind of pausing and slowing down, at least in some sections for some areas for a little while. Just gave everyone just enough room to breathe to say, oh, I'm not as okay as I pretend to be all the time. and oh, the world's changing very quickly. It's actually very stressful for me. And oh, my routine changing for what it's been for the last 2 years is very stressful for me. And people just rushing to normalize, thankfully, the idea that it's okay to ask for help. That's actually an okay human experience to not be okay.
Right.
I'm so glad we have people like you to turn to.
Oh, thank you. And I hope it's one thing that is here to stay. I think this summer in particular, we're talking summer 2022. I'm hearing a lot of people say it's time to go back to the office, or clients of mine saying, I can't meet you on Wednesday at 2 because I've got to be back at work at that time. And I'm so curious to see what stays, and how we transition back with just more. I've had clients say, like, I'm not coming to the office on Friday because I need a day from home and I have therapy on Fridays,
Yep.
And I just think that's so amazing that people feel that they can say that and that they have supervisors or colleagues that respect that. So I really hope that there gets to be more and more and more of that. The World Health Organization has said, basically this is another pandemic in the world, that mental health problems are really like a huge undermet need. And I think the CDC said that mental health concerns increased by 25% in 2020.
Yeah.
Like, that's outrageous.
Yeah.
40% of people were saying they were more anxious and or more depressed. And many of those people seeking help for that. So it's just this amazing shift in recognizing it and reaching out for help. And I'm really hoping that this change will stick around and that more and more agencies and companies and government will rise to the occasion of making this a priority.
100%. More and more people I'm talking to, both business owners and people who work for other people, that are saying that they're starting to implement policies that support people in their mental health, right? While there's some small business who can't maybe afford the best insurance that covers, all therapies, they're starting to offer like a mental health day or just a work from home days or, that kind of stuff, more vacation days, better schedules, right? Anything that lets people have just more balance in their lives. So maybe it's something topic we'll cover more, but let's start here because one of my favorite things to talk about with you, I think we've addressed this in the podcast before, but I think it's important to circle back in this new kind of context that we're in, which is for all of our listeners who run training gyms, trainers are often on the front lines of people's mental health challenges because people are coming into gyms or studio spaces, working on themselves, challenging themselves, connecting with their bodies in new and challenging ways. And often that can be, for lack of a better word, very triggering, right? That it brings up a lot of emotion, a lot of feelings, a lot of self-analysis, looking in that mirror, pushing and challenging yourself. So trainers often wind up being default therapists and people are bringing to them not just I want to lose 10 pounds but I don't love myself every time I look in the mirror. And so I know you've given us some tips here before, but just given this new context, I know you even do a course on this, right? You offer a course that's Psych Skills for Fit Pros, which I think every listener should take, and I'm sure we'll link to somewhere. But just give us your recent best thinking on like how fitness professionals can manage those moments on the floor when trainers really need mental health support.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that question because that is a very frequently asked question of me by fitness professionals. And I think the first thing to do is when you go to work and you're working with your clients, manage your expectation so that you are expecting your clients to communicate to you either overtly or covertly that they have something going on with their own psychology. So what I mean by that is a lot of coaches will talk to me about wanting to stay in their lane or stay in their scope of practice. And stay in their lane to me sounds very rigid. I think about like racing a car down a track or running on a track. And that idea is really nice in theory, but that's not how human beings work. Human beings are whole people who bring their body and their mind and all of their baggage with them everywhere they go. So I think coaches should think about staying in their lane like being in a pool. And yes, you have your lane and you have your area that you work on, which is, strength training or fitness or, whatever area you're in, maybe nutrition. But the water is the client, and the water is going to go in and out of every single lane. So all kinds of stuff that is not related to what you are doing is going to come up in the session. And that's to be expected. That is normal. And in addition to that, you also should acknowledge and respect the position of privilege that you are in as the coach, because often you are the only person in the course of a week who is giving 100% of your bandwidth and your focus and your attention to that person. So that person, that might be the only time they get somebody looking at them, watching their form, asking how they're feeling. You may remember details about their life or what's going on with them. So that might be the most like love and attention and bandwidth that they get. And so when they feel that and they experience that, and if they're really needing that, they may respond to that in a way of opening up more. And that doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It actually means you're doing your job well because you're present for your client. It's just that they are probably in need of additional support. And the data of that is that they're spilling content that doesn't belong in your session into the session.
Yeah. Oh, so beautiful. Can I just interrupt you there for a second? I want to just go back and say that, I think that first thing you said, I think stands out to me so much is that I think it's useful for trainers to reset their expectations when it comes to this topic. Because I think you're right. So many of the ones that I talk to have an attitude that reads to me like, well, that's not my job. Right? That's not what I signed up for. That's not my lane. And while I think neither of us are saying you have to be a therapist. We have to say that you should expect that stuff like that is going to show up, right? You are working with a whole human. You don't get to work with just part of the human. And if you're doing your job well, there actually will be more vulnerability. There'll be kind of more sharing, right? And that means that actually you're creating a safe space where they're comfortable, saying things out loud that maybe they haven't told anyone else. And so I think I think it's really crucial that trainers know that in this day and age, if you're doing your job well, this is going to happen. People are going to share things with you. Then you should just be ready. That's part of what the work looks like these days.
Right. And it's probably data that you are doing a good job because your client is like feeling comfortable enough.
Yeah.
Now, what you do with it is up to you. Coaches have different kinds of boundaries and different comfort zones. And so you don't have to be one way. Because you gave the example of a coach being like, that's outside my scope. That has nothing to do with what I'm doing. And if that's how you feel, that's okay.
Yeah.
You can't say that to the client because that's not going to be helpful for the rapport and the relationship. But you can figure out a shtick. You can figure out a way that you respond after a client shares something that you might feel is outside the scope. You might say, thank you for sharing that with me. It sounds like you're going through a really rough time. I know that, I don't typically help people by listening. I help people by getting them a good training effect and getting them stronger. And so I'd like to focus on that with you. But maybe after session, we can talk about how you could maybe get some more resources or some more support.
Yeah, that's...
So you still can set the limit. You don't have to be like, I'm going to be your everything. It's just how you frame it.
Yeah. I think that was beautifully said, Lisa, right? That, like, listen, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I can tell you're going through something. And, I want to focus on what I'm best at, which is training you and having a great session today. But I also, I'm happy to support you in getting the help you need. I just know it's not going to be me, but, but I'm here to help you, right? I think that's a great example of setting a boundary. A few minutes ago, you mentioned that during a session, there's going to be both overt and covert signals that your client is going through something. I was wondering if you can't just maybe elaborate on a little bit on that, because the overt ones are like obvious signs of distress or discomfort or emotion, and so those I think are pretty obvious ones that everyone can imagine. Can you talk maybe about the ones that might be below the surface?
Yeah. So the covert signs that you're probably going to see and pick up on are things that also can communicate distress and impairment. Distress and impairment is kind of how we measure, does the person have a mental health condition or are they just having a bad day? So if somebody's appetite has significantly changed, which you'll probably know about because you'll probably see weight loss or weight gain or not hitting macros, something like that if you're doing any nutrition coaching. You might hear about a change in sleeping patterns, so sleeping a lot, more than 9 hours a night, or not sleeping enough, less than 6 hours a night, or waking up frequently, having nightmares, some kind of problem with sleep. So those biological signs you are probably going to hear about. Even though the person's not reporting to you, hey, I have insomnia, or hey, I lost my appetite, you may come into contact with that information just by nature of the work that you're doing. You may also observe, this sounds scary. One of the symptoms of depression is psychomotor retardation, which just basically means like the person's kind of in slow-mo, they're fatigued, they have low energy, they have less coordination, being distracted and having less concentration, a difficulty paying attention and feeling indecisive can sometimes be symptoms of depression as well. Irritability is the hallmark of depression and anxiety, both, like just having a thin skin and every little thing annoying you. So if your clients are irritable, I bet you're going to see it in session because you're asking them to push outside their comfort zone, to get themselves uncomfortable, to do things like eat less and sleep more and things that are, annoying even on our best days sometimes. So those things, they may not be saying to you, hey, I have a mental health concern, but they're reporting these signs and symptoms of distress and impairment in their life, which may be a red flag that they've got something going on with their mental health.
It's a great list. It's a great list. And it just shows that, it's not always going to be super obvious this person is going through something. They might even know themselves to be able to articulate it. But we can look out for signs like all the things you just mentioned to make sure that we're giving them a little extra, love and support when we see those. So you gave the scenario before when someone wanted to kind of set a boundary and say, thank you for sharing this, but this is not my lane, essentially. You said it nicer. But what if there's trainers out there or people listening who are like, yeah, I don't actually mind engaging. I'm happy to have a little more conversation, offer a little bit more support. So, what do you think that looks like while still staying in someone's scope? Without trying to be a therapist, what does offering a little bit more support you think look like?
Yeah, so the most important part is to be authentic. So whatever I say next, whatever quotes I give, it would of course be in your voice and in your style and with your ways that you use humor or expression. That's really the most important. But if you feel comfortable, I always like the approach of leading with using observe and describe. Observe and describe means you're not making a judgment. You're not saying like, I wonder if you're suffering from anxiety.
Yep.
But that you're using things that either happen in the session or using words that your client has said to you to reflect back to them to show them that maybe something's going on with their mental health. So for example, you might say to a client, hey, I just wanted to use our check-in to share with you and kind of brainstorm about a couple of things I'm noticing. Like, for example, the first 8 weeks we were working together, you were like gangbusters, you were like bopping in here, you were asking a lot of questions, you were getting all your workouts in, and you seemed like pumped and optimistic. And I just noticed over these last 4 weeks, it's been harder to get here on time. You seem tired, and it seems like work is still on your mind. And you've missed, 4 in the last 4 weeks, so maybe about once a week. So there's just this shift, and you don't seem as like jazzed about where this is all going. So I just wanted to like check in and see if you've noticed that change too.
Amazing.
And that you might observe and describe changes in eating habits, changing in sleeping habits, changes in their mood, changes in how frequently or consistent they are in whatever their habits are or their workouts are. Yeah. But the idea is, instead of saying, I've been watching you and I think you've gotten depressed, you're showing them the data points and then being like, what do you think?
Yeah.
Because ultimately what you want is them to be like, yeah, man. And they might cry because somebody's like actually seeing them, and validating what's going on, or you might be giving them permission to talk about it. So don't freak out if a tear drops, or if a person says, I'm fine. And if you have a Gen Xer or a baby boomer, they might say that. As we get through like millennials and Gen Z, you get more and more likely the person's going to take you up on that invitation. Yep. But it's okay even if they don't take you up on the invitation, if they're like, I don't know what you're talking about, I'm fine. Because you know what you did? You planted a seed of saying like, I see you. And here's what I observe. And then maybe a week later, their spouse says something. And maybe 2 weeks later, their friend says something. And so that just helps them accumulate those data points. And really, you are on the front lines. So you get really rich data about how your client is doing. And it's okay to share that with them.
Yeah. Oh, that was so beautiful, Lisa. I mean, even just you pretending to say it to someone, like it felt good to hear, right? Like just the idea that someone can be like watching you and seeing you and caring enough to, as you said, observe and describe what they've been seeing in you. I think is such a beautiful gift, right? It's just holding up a mirror to someone and saying like I see you. Do you see you? Right? It's such kind of just a fantastic tool that I think whether we're talking about observing and describing kind of these things or anything else, right, that you're doing with your clients, I think offering our lens on how they're showing up, I think is just kind of a valuable gift we can give without judgment. And I love that you said that you have to do it authentically as you. Right? I mean, like the words you used were your words, but I love that you emphasize that, because I think so often when I talk to folks, they're like, well, what do I say? Like, give me the script. And the reality is just like, well, I can give you the tools, but really you got to find your own words. It's got to feel like you really mean it. It's got to feel authentic. So I love that you emphasize that. I want to switch topics. Is there anything else should we say about that before we move on? I think you will.
No, I think you racked it up nicely by saying it's really the quality of how you say it and that you express your concern than the quantity of like getting it, technically just right.
Yeah, exactly. You just got to start by tapping into your compassion for the people you work with, and just share. I love that framework of just like observe and describe, just without an agenda, without judgments, just share what you've been seeing and hearing, and let them get curious about it with you. I think that is so fantastic. I want to switch gears because the other topic I want to talk about, I think we can do this in the next 10 minutes, is I want to talk about behavior change when it comes to team members. Because one of the things I think you and I both get asked a lot about is of people that we're coaching and consulting who are business owners, managers, people who manage people. are often trying to get those people to change their behavior, from show up on time to have more energy to check your emails to all the things that we want our staff to do, and a lot of times the people I'm talking with are just so frustrated that they can't get their staff just do what they want to do. And I know that one of your specialties, is motivation, behavior change. And so I just want to talk about what are your best tips here for first-time managers and leaders out there who just haven't found a groove yet, haven't found an approach to how to get people to do what they want them to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, right now I'm reading Primal Leadership, which is Dan Goldman's newer book about emotional intelligence. And so if somebody is really thinking a lot about this, I do think that book is worth a read because, Dr. Goldman wrote the original emotional intelligence, and I think EQ now is just like blown up, especially in industrial organizational psychology. Michael, I don't know if it was required reading for you.
100% read them both. Yep.
Yeah. And so, I think, and feel free to edit me, but I think that really one of the predominant messages in that book and in Goldman's work is, bringing your authenticity and your care and your energy and your investment and your enthusiasm into a leadership position and relationship is really central to it being successful.
Yeah.
So every manager that's out there, you have some kind of style that's authentic to you. And just like I don't want to give you a script, I don't want to tell you like how to come at it. But I think what's really important to do, especially with younger generations, and by that I mean millennials and Gen Z, is that you have got to be very concise and very precise and very concrete about what it is that you'd like them to improve and to work on. So Gen X and baby boomers, and I'm a Gen Xer, so I feel like I can make fun of my own generation. Like, we really came from that mindset of like, you just have to figure it out, like put your head down and don't complain and don't ask questions and don't say anything.
And that's the generation of managers and leaders that I'm working with, like you and I, who came from that school of thought of just like, well, I told you how to do it. What's the friggin' problem?
Yes. And young generations are like, wait, like, what do you want? And what does that look like? And what's our timeline? And so the more specificity you can provide, the better. And so what I recommend is as a manager, you are a collaborator. How can I support you so that you can be successful and that we as a business can be successful? And so you might say as the leader, this is an outcome or this is a process or a task that I'd really like you to improve on. Let's talk together about how we can help you rock that. And what I would do is like in pen and paper or on computer, just really concretely outline in the next 60 days, in the next 90 days, whatever period of time, you're going to be working to improve X. And here's how we'll be able to measure that you are working on or improving X. So let's say it's checking your emails, every day you go in there at this time and at this time and you, I don't know, make a little check mark or you, you do something to sort of measure that. So you have a measurable way that is really concrete. And then that there's follow through at the end of that 60-day or 90-day or whatever the interval is, that you talk about it and that you take a posture of what's going to help you to meet this goal or what's going to help you to make this change. So that you take on this collaborative posture and not like okay, you're doing bad at this, like figure it out and we'll meet again in 3 months and we'll see if you've got a job or not.
Yeah.
Like, that is not going to fly with anybody who's like under the age of 40.
No, it's really not going to fly at all. Well, and it's so interesting because right? I mean, I will say that our generation came from this workplace where really positional authority was enough, right? Because I'm your boss, because I'm in charge, I didn't need anything else besides that title and that position to tell you what to do. And I gave you instructions once, and after that, it was appropriate for me to just be mad at you or fire you or discipline you. And that's just not the world we live in. I think, that what we're being asked of is, to your point, is to be collaborators now. So I think that positioning, I think, is so spot on, is that you got to think of yourself even though you're a manager or peer or owner of your business, you got to think of yourself like a collaborator with every employee, that you're on the same team, that you sit side by side, right? And work hand in hand to get stuff done. And I love that you mentioned that you need to both have access to the emotional information, right? That's what emotional intelligence is, right? It's like understanding and using emotional information to understand yourself and other people. And so you need to be having that conversation. It's not enough to know what the task is, but I think these days I'm encouraging all of the people I coach with to say, okay, once we review the task, I want to ask you, how do you feel about doing this task? Right?
Yeah.
What could get in your way? How is this balanced with everything else that's on your plate? Right? If you're not having that that holistic conversation around how's this fit into your context, then you're not using any emotional intelligence. In addition to that, I think what you stress is also so important is there's got to be real clarity of communication, real clarity of purpose. Here's the end. Here's what our end goal is. Here's some strategies to try. What do you think we should try? Right? There's got to be some real clarity and accountability. So I think ultimately, saying all this, and I say this all the time to people I work with, is that we're asking a lot of managers and leaders these days. We're asking a lot of them, and I think it's right that we do. Right? I'm not mad about that, but it means if you want to be a really great manager and leader for multiple generations, including all the kids out there entering the workforce, you're going to have to be very disciplined about how you assign tasks, clarify roles and responsibilities, hold people accountable, and improve your EQ, right? Use emotional information to make all of that better. So, tell me this, Lisa, because I'm sure we could both, I'll speak for myself, I can ramble about this for a long time. But for people who are managing staff for the first time, and we have a lot of those in our Unicorn Society group, or they're just managing people for the first time, what are some just kind of tried and true practices that you find are really valuable for managers to take on? What are some like habits they should have in terms of how they interact with their team on a regular basis?
Yeah, I think frequency of interaction is a big deal, and I think transparency is really important. In other words, if you're a manager and you're getting aggravated, or if your panties are getting in a bunch about some little thing that one of your staff is doing, do not hold on to that for 3 months until you're like really pissed. You know, you bring it up right away. So what I think is good is to create that culture, create that ambiance where there can be two-way feedback, where your staff can talk to you about what's going well and what they'd like to go better, and where you can be talking about, even if they're just little teeny tiny things, what are the things that are going well and what are the things you'd like to see improvement on, so that you don't let anything snowball until either it's a big problem or you're just really, really aggravated by it. Because once you're really aggravated and you have a resentment, it's just much more complicated and emotional to deal with. So it's kind of like, instead of doing like a big house cleaning once a month, it's like just do these little chores daily or frequently.
Exactly.
So I think frequent contact is good. I think building that culture of transparency where there's upward and downward feedback on a regular basis is really good. And at least twice in the last 2 months, I have read articles. One was from the Harvard Business Review on having like frequent kind of check-ins, like before a staff meeting, how are you doing, Michael, on a scale of 1 to 10, or, asking about where's your stress out, or where's one thing that's going on right now, like going along with that change in the reduction of stigma. I also see this increase in, can we just acknowledge that everybody in the room is a human being? And before we jump into business, everybody spend a minute talking about how they're actually doing today. And if you're good. And if you're not good, that's okay too. Like, we can hear that, we acknowledge that, and we can still work together.
I think you're absolutely right. I agree with that 100%. I think that's kind of the trifecta for new manager skills these days, right? Is like have a really good pulse for how often and frequently you're meeting with people, and the more frequent the better, right? Where you're not letting things pile up. I love your analogy. It's like, well, you could just clean a little every day, or you could be a hoarder and have to be on that TV show where people come to your house with dump trucks, right? And so, and all due respect for the fact that that's a real condition for people. But the idea here is if we just clean a little every day, you don't have to spend, at the end of each month just yelling at everyone, right? A little feedback. And I think the second thing you mentioned is just transparency, feedback up and down the ladder, so to speak. I think that's so huge, right? To make sure that you as leaders are also inviting feedback and being thoughtful about how you give and receive it. I think that's fantastic. And your last one, and maybe I'll just summarize in my own words, is personalization, right? that, my parents and grandparents, I imagine yours too, they grew up in the age of saying, well, it's not personal, it's just work. And this is the age of work is real personal, right? I spend a lot of my time here. I want to bring my full self here. And so you as a manager leader ought to spend some time making personal connections, making sure people see each other as humans first, as you said. So I think that's I think we'll leave it there. We're gonna end the podcast there, because I think as new managers, you got to be doing those three things all the time. Yeah. Amazing. Well, I'm going to cut it short just because I'm already over time. But Dr. Lewis, how can people find out more about you, find you on the internet? How can they work with you, hire you? Everyone should.
Thank you, Michael. You can find me at my home base, which is my website, drlewisconsulting.com. If you want to check out articles or podcasts that I've done in the past, you can find them on my media page. I also, as Michael mentioned, have a continuing education course called Psych Skills for Fit Pros. That is 13 hours of CEUs that's approved by NASM and the NSCA. And that is an online learn at your own pace curriculum that many unicorns have taken in the past.
Yep.
And that covers motivation, behavior change, motivational interviewing, and really tries to apply those theories and ideas specifically to working in fitness context. And then finally, follow my Instagram. Oh, I'm sorry, Michael. Did I cut you off?
No, please go ahead.
I can't see your face anymore.
No, get your Instagram.
Okay. Yeah, my Instagram is at Dr. Lewis Consulting, and that is my little baby. I try to do 2 or 3 posts a week connecting either mental health and fitness or psychology with the psychology of fitness and strength training.
Amazing. Yeah, I was only jumping in to say, like, listeners, if there's never been a course I think all of you should take on this podcast, aside from Psych Skills for Fit Pros, right? I think all of you should go take it immediately. It's essential. It's essential. Yeah. So thank you for making it. I think, our industry needs more and more of resources like that. And I'm just so glad that you're making them. So I'm sure I'll have you back again. But thank you for this conversation, Lisa. I appreciate you, and I'm sure our listeners do too.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
Well, I hope you loved today's podcast, and forgive me, I want to remind you one more time, if you haven't already done so, head over to businessofunicorns.com, click the button, and get your free self-assessment, the ultimate training gym owner report card. I promise you're going to want to dig into this resource and get the support you need, finding crystal clarity on exactly where you need to be focusing to create a life and a business you love.